Good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Hiltwine, and I'm the Senior R&D Specialist at CIT. I'm pleased to have you join me for today's webinar focused on the CRCF budget and budget narrative components. During this session, I'll walk you through the documents and what we are looking for, discuss matching requirements for CRCF programs, offer tips and common pitfalls to avoid and create strong budget submissions. Finally, I'll open up the floor for Q&A. Today's presentation does not cover CRCF applications and proposals. A session focused on these topics was held yesterday. It was recorded, and that will be available to you by the end of the week. A second session of both topics will also be offered in January, about a week prior to the application deadline. Before we get going, a note about the approach for this session. All participants have been placed on mute to avoid background noise and feedback. Questions may be submitted at any time during or following the presentation by expanding your webinar control panel and typing your questions into the questions feature. I mentioned that yesterday's webinar was recorded and will be available to view and to share. This session too will be available in its entirety by the end of the week from the solicitation landing page on CIT's website. The slides will be available from the same place by the end of today. First, let's take a look at matching funds in the context of those monies that are supplied by the applicant or its partners towards the project, not in the context of CRCF's matching funds program. In fact, there's a matching component for 3 of the 5 CRCF programs. The only 2 for which additional matching funds are not required are the SBIR and STTR matching funds programs, because the federal award serves as the CRCF project match. But what are matching funds? These are cash or in-kind monies supplied in an amount that matches or exceeds the amount of funding requested from CRCF. In the case of multi-year projects, matching funds must mirror the annual and total CRCF requests. Matching funds must be active and available during the CRCF period of performance and specific to the proposed project. Additionally, matching funds may exceed the one-to-one requirement or be provided even if not required, such as the case of SBIR and STTR projects. Matching funds cannot come from CIT gap funds, Mach 37, or state contracts or grants. Matches cannot be identified or secured after a CRCF award is made or expended prior to or after the CRCF period of performance. For example, if an applicant secured funds during a 3-year federal grant and are wrapping up year 1 of the award, funds already expended cannot be used as matching funds. Neither can funds that will be expended after the CRCF project ends. If you are a university applicant, however, contributing salaries or indirects, which may be state monies, is an acceptable match. So where can your match come from? Matches can be cash or in kind. It could include the salaries and or fringe benefits of team members on the project, materials, supplies, or equipment purchased specifically for the project by the applicant or its partners, travel costs directly associated with the project, and partner or subcontractor work contributed to the project. Waived indirect costs, such as G&A or overhead, are also acceptable matching funds. Federal, private, or other non-Commonwealth of Virginia grants or contracts that support the same work proposed in the CRCF application and align with the specific period of performance proposed in the CRCF application could also be matching funds. In the case that you are not able to use these funds as the match, for instance, if the period of performance on the monies has ended, mentioning this funding in your proposal is important because it demonstrates validation of the technology. The Matching Funds Program, which many of our university researchers participate in, focuses on that leverage. There are not budget category caps on matching funds. They can come from one or a variety of eligible sources in any combination. The budget and budget narrative templates are within a single Excel document, but are broken into 2 separate tabs. This is where you will record and explain the monies requested from CRCF and your matching funds. Both the budget and budget narrative must be completed and uploaded, still as a single Excel document, into your online application. Templates for the budget and budget narrative, like that for the proposal, are program specific. You must download it from CIT's website via the solicitation landing page, which is the URL that you see on this slide, and then by clicking on the program name you're applying under. This template, along with all of the other program materials required or useful for the submission process, are available via the Documents box on the top right-hand corner of the page. Both the Budget and Budget Narrative tabs of the template contain an instruction block at the top. Please review this carefully before you begin. I'll also cover those instructions here. Each applicant should enter their CIT reference number and project title in the appropriate fields on both tabs of the template. Your CIT reference number is a unique number assigned to your project at the time your LOI was converted into a program application. It's a number that begins with the program type, such as CP, ER, MF, SBIR, or STTR, and followed by the number 17. This number can be found within your instruction email or pre-entered into your online application. This number is not the 8-digit request ID number used to identify your LOI. While that number is still connected to your submission in the online portal, it's the CIT reference number that we will use to identify and refer to your project moving forward. And as you'll be instructed in the guidelines, this is the number that should be used in the file name for all uploaded documents, including the budget. Next, on the budget template, you'll see a combination of white and yellow cells. Enter data for your CRCF request and match into white cells. The yellow cells are formula-driven and locked. These cells will automatically populate based on the numbers you enter into the white cells. If your CRCF project will last longer than 12 months, contact the CRCF team to request a multi-year template. You'll need to indicate which program you're applying under and how long the project will last. This is the Matching Funds Program Budget template. However, all program templates will look very similar. The bottom of each budget has cells to calculate the percentage of CRCF requested funds for direct versus indirect costs. Remember that there's a cap on the amount of indirect costs applicants can request, varying by program. The guidelines, as well as the template itself, will identify this limit. Additionally, projects requesting funds to cover direct costs only are reviewed more favorably. Direct costs are those costs going specifically toward the project, such as labor, consumables, or consultants, while indirect costs are those such as overhead or G&A, costs of doing business that cannot be solely directed to the CRCF project. To complete the budget, fill in the requested funds and your project match by category, which are each line. Columns separate the CRCF request and match. A reminder that each match, for programs that require one, must equal or exceed the total amount of CRCF requested fund. The match does not need to mirror the requested categories. If you are an applicant under the SBIR or STTR matching funds programs, additional matching funds may be provided but are not required since that federal award serves as the match. Therefore, the column for match and the corresponding section on the budget narrative need only be completed if additional funds are provided. Otherwise, these matching sections can be left blank. The purpose of the budget narrative is to allow reviewers to understand how the applicant expects to spend CRCF funds. It also identifies the sources, amounts, and uses of matching funds. Like with the budget, enter data in the white cells, which is column B. These cells have wrap text enabled, but it wouldn't hurt before submitting to expand the row height and make sure that all of your content is visible. This will make it easier for CRCF reviewers to capture all of your information during the evaluation process. Please note that correctly completing the budget and budget narrative are expectations of all submitted applications. Review the program guidelines carefully for the required level of detail in the budget narrative. Guidance here is also called out in the template itself. An example of the Matching Funds Program budget template is seen here. At a high level, each budget narrative should explain the amounts and categories of requested and matching funds and detail how these monies will be used and what they will cover. In all cases, we ask you to provide as much detail as possible. All requests are closely assessed and must be justified as critical to the project. Over the next couple of minutes, I'll provide some examples of what we're looking for in a budget narrative. For example, if funds on the budget are allocated for labor, your narrative should explain who these funds cover, the salary for each person, and how much time they'll spend on the project. As another example, if funds are requested to cover fringe benefits, indicate what the benefits package includes, the fringe rate, and how you came up with this rate. Under consultants and subcontractors, you might put funds toward an attorney or patent filings, or a subcontractor who will process samples. In this category on the budget narrative, explain the funds requested and what they will cover. Indicate the location of the subcontractor or consultant, and if any work will be done outside of Virginia, this must be explained and justified. Also indicate why this individual was chosen. Regardless of the program, the total amount of CRCF funds requested for consultants or subcontractor work may not exceed 49%. CRCF applicants, including their contingent workforce, must conduct the majority of CRCF project work. For our purposes, the contingent workforce is defined as personnel that may become an employee of the applicant organization as the company grows. The effort of these individuals should be logged under labor rather than consultants or subcontractors. As a final example, if CRCF monies will be directed toward equipment, describe what is being purchased and its use for the CRCF project. You'll note that the goal of the CRCF is technology development work and that we are not a major equipment acquisition program. If limited funds are being sought for equipment, applicants must indicate why alternatives to purchasing, such as leasing or using at another organization, are not viable and demonstrate that the equipment is critical to advance the development of the specific product or technology proposed for CRCF. Indirect costs may not be charged on equipment. One question that we frequently are asked is whether items are considered materials or supplies or equipment. CRCF defines materials and supplies as consumables, disposables, or other short lifespan items. These are typically less expensive than items categorized as equipment. Equipment has a useful life of more than 12 months. This year again, a portion of your CRCF requests may go to support market validation activities, which we've defined in our FAQs and I'll also outline here. Market validation helps you confirm your target market, if market feedback for your concept or technology is positive, and if there's sufficient willingness to purchase your product or service when it's ready. Examples of what falls under market validation include online or other market research, including inquiring and reviewing reports, conducting surveys and interviews, and performing competitive analyses, interviews or marketing or sales meetings, attending conferences to assess competition and/or meet clients or potential clients, and developing a marketing plan. Up to 10% of the CRCF requests can support market validation for the commercialization, SBIR matching funds, and STTR matching funds programs, and up to 5% of the CRCF request can support these activities for the matching funds program. For anyone who would find seeing the explanation written out, this is question 54 on page 12 of the FAQs. Although CRCF does not provide sample proposals, we have a sample budget prepared. You may download the document from the solicitation landing page. In our application webinar yesterday, we covered tips to create strong proposals. I highly recommend you take a few minutes to view the recording of that session when it's available at the end of this week, or plan to join in on the January 9th session. As part of today's presentation, I'll highlight some things to keep in mind and to pay attention to when preparing your project budget. Reviewers look for precision in the budget and that requested funds be appropriate and specific to achieving the goals of the proposed project. We recommend that applicants double-check their calculations in the budget to ensure the total amount of requested funds is accurate against the budget narrative breakdowns. For example, When you calculate the rate of pay for key personnel and the amount of time they'll commit to the project, overall, there should be consistency throughout the proposal, budget, and application, such that information included in the budget and budget narrative map to other materials. This can be, for example, making sure that the total CRCF request and match are the same as what you keyed into your application and included in the required top portion of your proposal, or that key personnel called out in the budget narrative are identified in the proposal for the work that they'll conduct. One thing that I called out before, but will mention again here, is to pay particular attention to budget category caps, such as indirect, consultants and subcontractors, and market validation. You can find these program-specific caps in the guidelines or within the budget template. And lastly, speaking of the template, I can't stress enough to download and complete the current program-specific budget templates. If your submissions are not prepared in accordance with the guidelines, including format and content, it will not advance past initial review. CIT will not reach out to applicants for clarification or more information. Again, all templates and materials you will need to complete your application should be downloaded from the program pages on CIT's website, from the document box in the top right-hand corner. The URL that will get you there will be on the next slide. All the information that you'll need for the FY17 round is available from this solicitation landing page, and then from the program pages accessible from it. Here you'll find the webinars, registration links, or the slides and recordings from sessions already hosted, the FAQs document, and sample materials. If you have any questions throughout the solicitation that are not addressed by the available materials, please reach out to my team at CRCF@CIT.org. We are available during business hours, Monday through Friday, and look forward to working with you on your submission. Remember, completed applications, including all of the components, are due by noon on Thursday, January the 19th. This concludes the prepared portion of the webinar. I'd now like to invite any questions you may have at this time. Again, questions should be submitted by expanding the webinar control panel and then using the questions function. I'll address all questions in the order that they come in as best as possible for the benefit of all participants. If a question does require more information, I'll follow up with that individual separately at the conclusion of the session. So our first question today is about budget caps and whether that is overall or for the particular sections. So the budget caps are 4 categories. I'll call out the 3 that are market validation, subcontractors and consultants, and indirect costs. Now these vary by program. So for our matching funds program, there is a 30% cap on indirect costs, and for our 3 private sector programs, there is a 10% cap on indirect costs. Those caps are specific to the amount of CRCF funds requested. I think the easiest example is looking at our private sector programs, which has a maximum request amount of $50,000. So if you would like to maximize the amount of indirect costs that you can request, it would be 10% of that $50,000 or up to $5,000. So similarly for our matching funds program, which has a maximum request amount of $100,000, if you are requesting that match, and you could then ask for 30% of that covered. When you're looking at these caps, it is specific to the CRCF request. So it would not be inclusive of whatever matching funds you provide. It would just be specific to the requested amount. And for any of these questions, if that doesn't fully answer your question or you'd like to discuss further, please feel free to ask a follow-up question or certainly to email crcf@cit.org, and I'd be glad to work with you further. The next question, is there a requirement for the percentage of the matching funds to the CRCF fund? I'm not sure exactly that I understand your question, so if this doesn't get to it, please let me know. Matching funds must be contributed at least 1-to-1 to your CRCF request. So as an example, under the matching funds program, if you're requesting the maximum $100,000, you must provide at least $100,000 in matching funds toward the project. If you think of it, you would be conducting a $200,000 project with our money and with yours. And that match can come from any number of sources that we talked about in the examples. It could be one of those sources, it could be many of them, but you would be looking to match it at least 1-to-1. And matching funds do not have to mirror the categories requested by CRCF. So for example, you may be asking CRCF to cover labor and some materials, but you may be providing your matching funds in the form of travel and indirects. So there doesn't have to be a 1-to-1 correlation there by category, only in the amount of money that's provided. Is there a requirement to match funds from a small business? So CRCF certainly encourages collaboration between the public and private sectors, but the matching funds do not have to come from a particular organization. If you are a small business applicant, the match could come from you as that applicant organization. It could come from a partner, which may be another small business or perhaps a university. It could come from a grant that you're working on. So those funds could come from a variety of sources, and regardless of program, it does not have to come from a particular type of organization. The one caveat to that, if there is anybody who is participating today or who will be listening in, is the Eminent Researcher Recruitment Program. This is available only to our public universities here in Virginia, but that does have a requirement that at least 50% of the match must come from a private sector partner. I think the vast majority of our participants today, though, will not fall under that category. So can you please clarify matching funds program and the cap for some contracts? Is this new? So this is something that has been part of CRCF since the very beginning. We have always emphasized that the applicant organization, be it the small business, be it a university or a federal lab, conduct the majority of the CRCF project work. So we are not looking for your organization to be a pass-through to a subcontractor. Therefore, you must conduct at least 51% of the work with you and your staff, and you can subcontract out up to 49% of that work for other tasks. When we talked during our examples, the subcontractor or consultant work could be things like a lawyer's fee for looking at IP protection, or it could be another company who is going to be actually processing samples. But that would be the less than half of the work required to complete the CRCF project would be for the subcontracts and consultants. In the matching funds program, can unrecovered indirects be applied as university contribution to cost match? Yes, it can. That's an appropriate source of matching funds and common for our university applicants. I think we've probably covered this, but I'll go over it one more time. Should the budget be matched for each category or the total? So it should be for the total. If you have a multi-year project, we do see some that are 2 years in length. You would also have to mirror the years. So you may be requesting for a matching funds program $50,000 in year 1 and $50,000 in year 2. Your matching funds would need to mirror that. So $50,000 of your match must come in year 1, $50,000 must come in year 2. So I believe this question is regarding our matching funds program. So if the grant is $100,000 and CRCF is supplying 50 and we supply 50, being $100,000 the max. If this is regarding the matching funds program for the universities, you could request from CRCF up to $100,000, provide up to that $100,000 in match, and then you would essentially be looking at a $200,000 program. For our private sector applicants, that would be $50,000 in request, $50,000 in match, and a $100,000 program. And I'll clarify for our private sector commercialization program because the SBIR and STTR a little bit different since that federal award serves as the project match. So we have a question about salaries being contributed as matching funds. So in startup where your employees may not be paid for market value for our skills, would the focus on the project at fair market value be acceptable as matching funds? Yes. So one of the things that is really common in CRCF is these young companies who are just getting started with their proof of concept projects we understand that you might not be accepting a salary, and you may still not be accepting a salary even throughout your CRCF project. It may take a while to build up to that. What we would ask for you to provide in your budget and budget narrative is what your job is worth. And we do take a look at that. We would compare to a senior developer, for example, and make sure that those costs are reasonable. But you would be asking CRCF to cover what you would be accepting in the job if you were working, for instance, for a big corporation or someone where you're not requesting that funding. So in that budget narrative, you would provide that rate of pay, how much time you would spend on the project, and the total amount of effort that would equate back to the request or the match, whatever you're providing for your salary. And again, I think we probably have covered this through a couple of other questions, but CRCF funds do not need to match the matching funds by category. It would just be, again, that overall cost. So the G&A category in the sample budget, G&A would be the general and accounting, and these could be costs, certainly your Office of Sponsored Programs or others who you'll work closely with if this is a university question, would be the costs that could be doing business. Oftentimes we'll see things in either overhead or G&A. It just depends on how your particular organization structures things. But in general, that indirect cost category would be things like lighting. It could be rent. It could be supplies, office supplies, or things like that. Those general costs of doing business that wouldn't necessarily fall or could be broken out specific to the CRCF project. So for commercialization program grants, is it acceptable if the match is 100% labor from the applicant? That would be a perfectly acceptable match. There's no problem in showing that the effort that you're putting forward towards the project will be the sole source of the matching funds. So we have a question about whether the indirect paid as part of the matching funds comes out of the requested budget. I think the way that you are asking is whether or not you have to look at it based on just the request or just the match. If you are providing indirect funds as part of your match, then that can be whatever those indirect costs are. You wouldn't be taking a portion of that from the request, and there wouldn't be a cap on those matching funds. So you might be able to put forward more indirect costs, more than a 10% cap or a 30% cap if that was something that you wanted to contribute as part of your matching funds, but there would not be the same restriction there on those monies as there would be for the CRCF requested funds. So we have a question about the subcontractor requirements and the indirect cost rate of the subcontractor. Any of the costs related to your subcontract would be considered the subcontractor category. So if you are going to be requesting CRCF to cover the subcontract in its entirety, including those indirect costs, that would all have to fall within that 49% cap. So we were looking at any work done by a subcontractor to be under that category. That would not be counting against your indirect cost cap. And in terms of eligibility of the subcontractor being the same as the main applicant, we don't need any of the information regarding your subcontract. So I think the way to approach this question would be to let you know that your proposal should talk about the CRCF project. And when you get to the discussion of the work plan and the work that's going to be accomplished with the funding, we are going to ask that you provide a detailed work plan. What are the activities? What are the subtasks? What are the milestones? And who's going to be performing that work? So talk to us about the tasks that are going to be completed and who's going to do those tasks, whether it be the applicant or the subcontractor. Make it very clear the split of the effort. When you go to complete your budget, we would look for you to also split that information into the budget. So you may be requesting labor and subcontract support from CRCF. Under the labor, you would talk about the effort of the key personnel. Again, that should map to what you just told us in your proposal. And similarly for the subcontract, we would look for you to say who those subcontractors are, what's their organization, their rate of pay, and that should map again to what you told us in the proposal. We don't need any documentation in terms of your internal agreement with a consultant or subcontractor. We don't need you to provide sort of their information as part of your budget, what that agreement looks like. Their eligibility would be based upon the need that you are trying to fulfill for the project. So if you determine that you work with a group who is great at processing samples for this particular technology, you work with that group all the time, and that's who you're going to use as the subcontractor for your CRCF project, then that meets the eligibility. So we're really looking for CRCF. When we were talking about the eligibility of applicants and looking at LOIs, it would be for the main applicant. The one caveat to that is that if you are using someone outside of Virginia, we would like justification as to why that particular individual or company was selected. Maybe it is because you've had a long-term relationship, you know the quality of their work, but because this is a state-funded program and we are looking for the returns to be here in the Commonwealth, providing that additional level of information would be helpful and important as you prepare your proposal and your budget. So we have a great question here about approved indirect rates versus the cap on CRCF projects. For our purposes, this year we are not requesting any information regarding caps. In the past, we have asked applicants to provide their approved rate and then the rate that they are requesting from CRCF, and this year that's off the table. So we are trying to make it as straightforward as possible, and regardless of what your approved rate is, you can only request up to a certain amount of funds from CRCF to cover those indirect costs. So if you have a private sector program, our commercialization, SBIR, STTR, you can request up to 10% of your total CRCF requests in indirect costs. Just tell us what those costs would be that you're asking us to cover.